The last spark. The planet was called Alar-3 by the Galactic Union. To the humans who lived there, it was simply New Dawn. When the first settlers arrived over 80 years ago, it was nothing more than a rock with breathable air and a stubborn soil that took decades to yield proper crops. No fancy cities, no high-tech defenses, just families, farmers, engineers, and a few scrappy ex-military types trying to build a life far from Earth's chaos. To the rest of the galaxy, New Dawn was just another human colony, not even a full member of the Union, barely worth noticing. And that's exactly how humanity wanted it, until the Core Empire showed up. The Core were brutal 10 FT tall scaled monsters with bone armor and blades fused into their arms. They didn't believe in negotiation. They believed in conquering. When their fleet arrived in orbit, they didn't send diplomats. They sent fire. Thomas Gray, mayor of the largest settlement, was in the middle of a town meeting when the first blasts came down from the sky. The ground shook so hard people fell off their chairs. Windows shattered, kids screamed, the warning sirens blared too late, the colony had no weapons, not really. A few defense turrets, some repurposed mining bots, and a couple dozen old rifles that hadn't been used in 20 years. Within hours, half the town was gone, and still they resisted. Miners threw explosives into enemy drop ships. Farmers dug trenches and shot from behind tractor engines. Old veterans who hadn't touched a gun in decades picked up arms again and taught others how to fight. They bled and they screamed and they refused to kneel. One young girl, barely 15, stood over her dying father, holding a plasma pistol twice her size and swore to make them all pay. Her name was Elra. Her face would later become a symbol. But that day, no one cared about symbols. They just wanted to survive. The Core broadcast a message across the system 2 days into the invasion. This colony now belongs to the Empire. Resistance is suicide. What they didn't know, what they never imagined, was that New Dawn was never just a colony. It was a seed. Hidden deep underground in a bunker sealed to everyone but the oldest surviving settlers lay something the galaxy thought humanity had long abandoned: the Armada Protocol. A last-ditch planet-wide distress system. A beacon designed not to beg for help but to call the wolves. The man who activated it was Elias Murdane. He was 94, and no one remembered he once commanded a dreadnought during the old Earth Wars. He had been waiting for this moment his entire life. When he placed his trembling hand on the pad and whispered the old phrase, "Let them know we remember," the signal burst out like lightning across 100 hidden relays. Not to Earth. Earth was too busy with politics. The signal went to them, the ones who had disappeared, the exiled fleets, the ghost ships, the war-torn. Humanity's armada wasn't gone. It had just been sleeping, for now. Far beyond the edges of mapped space where no galactic patrols dared venture, a ship the size of a small moon stirred. It had no name, not anymore. The markings on its hull had long been scorched away by old wars. Inside, men and women woke from stasis. Not civilians, not scientists, but warriors bred and built for one purpose: vengeance. Elias Mordane's signal had reached them. After 60 years of silence, the Armada Protocol was live. The first to respond was Admiral Kale Varric, a legend believed to be dead. He had once commanded the fleet that saved Europa Station from extinction back when Earth still feared extinction. He stood now at the bridge of the forgotten warship Judicator, watching the data stream flow in. Colony coordinates, damage reports, core fleet strength, civilian casualties. His jaw tightened as he read the figures. Estimated survivors, he asked. Less than 12,000 and dropping. Kale turned slowly toward his crew, many of whom had never seen real combat, only trained for it across simulations and drills. "We are no longer the forgotten," he said coldly. "Alar-3 blades and we bleed with them." He activated the holo map. Dozens, no, hundreds of ships began responding across old encrypted channels. Retired warships, black site cruisers, mercenary bands loyal only to old Earth codes, pirate clans once hunted by the Union. All awakened by the same thing, a human scream for help. Back on New Dawn, the fight wasn't over. Elra had survived the first wave, hiding in the rubble of what used to be her school. She'd found a wounded Core soldier nearby, young, separated from his unit. She didn't hesitate. She shot him point blank in the eye. The recoil knocked her back. The heat scorched her hand, but she didn't drop the weapon. Her mother was gone. Her little brother, too. She didn't cry, not anymore. Instead, she dragged herself across the ash-covered ground toward the old communications outpost, where the last few militia fighters were regrouping. Thomas Gray was there, arm in a makeshift sling, shouting orders into a rusted transmitter. "They're regrouping near the refinery," he said, nodding when he saw her. "We've got 10 minutes to fall back to the caves." Zelra limped to him. "Are they coming?" He looked at her, old eyes, tired eyes. I sent the signal. Her voice cracked and now we wait. But waiting didn't mean surrender. By the time the Corps realized humans weren't breaking, they were adapting, it was already too late. The militia started using core weapons, repairing their broken gear with scrap and old tech. Even children helped, rerouting power grids, salvaging batteries, building barricades out of burned vehicles. The colony had become a fortress. Then the sky changed. A week after the signal, the clouds lit up in unnatural ways. Long streaks of silver and fire cut through the atmosphere. At first, the Corps thought it was meteors, a strange phenomenon, something to be ignored. Then their orbital scans began to fail. Then their ships exploded. The first human fleet didn't announce itself. It didn't open hails or issue threats. It descended, a wave of machines, armor, and thunder, blacker than space and quieter than death. From the mountains to the ocean ridge, drop pods smashed into the planet like meteor strikes. Tanks with walking legs marched across craters. Infantry in black exoframes moved through forests like ghosts, each carrying weapons that hummed with restrained fury. And at the center of it all, Admiral Kale's voice finally broke through the static. To the Core Empire, you have attacked a child of Earth. You have spilled innocent blood. You made one mistake. He paused. You thought New Dawn was just a colony. Silence, then the skies opened wider and humanity began to take back its own. The first full strike came at dusk. The Corps had begun to regroup near the eastern ridge, building a forward base with the stolen scrap from human towns. Their command ship hovered above like a bloated vulture, secure in its belief that the worst had passed. They didn't see the stealth pods land in the valley below. They didn't hear the black armored specters rise from the ground, completely silent, completely invisible to Core sensors. The first explosion came from underneath their own launch pads. Then the shadows turned into soldiers. They weren't like the militia. These weren't farmers with rifles or miners with makeshift bombs. These were the remnants of the Terran Ghost Division, combat units born from the darkest parts of humanity's wars, trained to dismantle entire civilizations in weeks. They didn't scream, they didn't chant, they executed. In less than an hour, the Core eastern base was a crater. Elra saw it all from a cliffside ridge. She and Thomas had been moving supplies when the firestorm erupted below them. She stared, eyes wide, as precision airstrikes rained like falling stars, each one hitting exactly where it needed to. Thomas just whispered, they came. By the next morning, New Dawn's sky was choked with ships. Human ships, frigates hovered like statues in the upper clouds, deploying drones and recon teams. Drop ships landed every hour, bringing medics, engineers, food, weapons, hope. Refugee zones turned into staging grounds. Cave shelters became underground bases. For the first time in days, children cried from confusion, not terror. That alone felt like a miracle. But it wasn't over, not even close. Admiral Kale stood at the command deck of Judicator, eyes on the planetary feed, jaw tight. We've shattered their outer line, his second-in-command, Commander Vera Lyse, reported. But their main warship is still in low orbit, protected by planetary shields. If we want to finish this, we have to take it out. Kale didn't blink. We're not here to survive. We're here to remind them who we are, prepare Archangel Protocol. Vera hesitated. That will level a third of the impact zone. Kale finally turned. How many colonies have they leveled? How many children did they burn out of their homes? His voice dropped. We don't win by being careful, we win by being human. Back on the surface, Elra watched as one of the new soldiers approached her and Thomas. The man's armor gleamed like obsidian, his face hidden behind a blank helmet. He spoke in a voice like gravel and smoke. You're the one who killed a Core with a plasma pistol. She nodded slowly. A name? Elra, just Elra. The man turned his helmet toward Thomas. She's coming with us. High Command wants her, says the broadcast picked up her face. Half the galaxy's seen it now. Thomas looked stunned. She's a child. No, she's a symbol. Elra didn't argue. She stood tall, silent, and followed him without hesitation. They brought her to a strike carrier, Iron Resolve, and handed her a data pad. On it were images of other colonies, other attacks, other flames, hundreds of them, some recent, some old. The Core had been doing this for decades. They call us weak, the soldier beside her said. They say humans don't have claws, that we're soft, that we beg. He pointed to the view window where dozens of Earth's warships hung in orbit like angry gods. We're about to teach them what we really are. And then the Archangel Protocol activated. From Judicator's belly, a column of blue fire descended. It didn't roar. It sang, a piercing hum that made your teeth ache and your soul shiver. It didn't just destroy the Core warship, it erased it. In a blink, the once impenetrable shield shattered. The Core vessel cracked in half, spilling burning metal into the upper atmosphere. Chunks of it rained down like a cursed meteor shower. On every frequency, Kale's voice returned. This is no longer a rescue. This is retribution, and we are far from done. By the third day of the counteroffensive, the Corps weren't fighting to win. They were fighting to escape. The skies above New Dawn were owned by humanity now. Human satellites blocked enemy scans. Drones flew day and night, relentless as hawks. Any Corps unit larger than a squad was marked, hunted, and eliminated within the hour. Admiral Kale had turned the planet into a test site for war doctrines that hadn't been used in decades. Orbit-to-ground coordination was so precise that troops on the surface could request an airstrike and see it hit in less than 60 seconds. But it wasn't just firepower that broke the Corps. It was fear. They weren't used to pray that bit back. They weren't used to enemies who adapted faster than they could adjust. The Corps had thought humans were soft. Now they watched as their forward bases were captured, dismantled, and rebuilt in human designs overnight. They listened to intercepted transmissions of human operatives taunting them in their own tongue. They began to realize what kind of beast they had awoken. Elra, now wearing a gray combat jacket with a red insignia stitched over the chest, half flame, half gear, stood beside Commander Vera Lyse in the mobile command unit. She had become more than a symbol now. She was learning command structure, strategy, core physiology. She asked hard questions. She made bold suggestions, and they listened to her. She watched footage from liberated zones, small towns in the mountain valleys where survivors were found hiding in wells and caves. Kids holding sticks who hadn't seen the sun in a week. A mother clutching her infant who hadn't cried since the invasion began. Each life rescued made her more determined. Each ruined face made her colder. But the Corps weren't done yet. One final stronghold remained, a massive fortress city constructed in the northern polar range. It was a towering complex of obsidian and steel built into the bones of a glacier. It had enough power reserves to last years, and inside it was the remaining Corps general, Varl, known as the Devourer in their own war songs. He had led the massacre at Vulcar 9, slaughtered unarmed medics at the Battle of Eden's Gate. Now he waited for humanity to come to him. Kale didn't hesitate. We burn it to the ground. But Elra didn't agree. He wants that, she said quietly during the command meeting. He wants us to storm it. He wants to bleed us out in his nest. Vera raised an eyebrow. You have a better idea. Elra stared at the map. We bury him. And so the plan was born. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't glorious. It was human. The fleet began orbital mining. Massive drills bored into the ice shelf from miles away, redirecting geothermal energy flows. Engineers redirected meltwater rivers while combat drones swarmed the outer perimeter, drawing attention and fire. The Corps stayed inside, ready for a siege. But the ground beneath them was shifting. Elra stood at the edge of the canyon when it happened. She watched from a forward station as the last energy beam triggered the final collapse. The glacier groaned like a dying god. Then the entire foundation gave way. Varth and his fortress were swallowed whole. No heroic last stand, no bloody final charge, just a cold, crushing death beneath a mile of ice. Afterward, Elra didn't cheer. She simply whispered, "For New Dawn." But the war wasn't over. As the human fleets resupplied and the colony began rebuilding, encrypted signals started lighting up all across the outer systems. Other colonies had heard the call. Other buried signals were activating. Kale stood before a table of grim-faced admirals. This wasn't an isolated attack, he said. The Corps have been harvesting our worlds in silence. We just didn't want to see it. Now humanity did, and now humanity was angry. He pointed at a galactic map lighting up with potential targets. We're not here to defend. We're here to make sure this never happens again. A new operation began, Project Earthshatter, and in its center stood a girl from a broken town with blood on her hands and fire in her eyes. The black insignia of Project Earthshatter became the symbol of something ancient, something raw, human wrath made real. It wasn't about justice anymore. It wasn't even about survival. It was about memory. Every colony the Corps had burned, every cry the stars had swallowed, every unanswered call for help, humanity remembered all of it now. And memory, when paired with fury, was a weapon more dangerous than any fleet. On board the Judicator, Admiral Kale stood before a wall-sized display showing 3 systems marked for immediate strikes. They were not Corps military outposts. They were slave hubs, places where the Corps had kept humans like animals, used them, experimented on them, sold them. Locations the Galactic Union had known about and ignored. These, Kale growled, are where we begin. The fleet divided. The Iron Resolve, with Elra now officially assigned as a liaison between Fleet Command and Colony Resistance networks, was sent to Asteron 5, one of the oldest mining colonies humanity had ever lost contact with. No one had heard from Asteron in 42 years. Elra sat in the dropship as they descended into a choked atmosphere. Acid fog curled against the windows, and twisted spires of broken metal jutted from the ruined landscape like skeletal fingers. Her helmet's oxygen feed hissed softly, a steady rhythm against her racing pulse. When they landed, silence greeted them. Not gunfire, not alarms, just wind and the whimpering static of a long-dead emergency beacon. The first bodies were found inside the refinery bunkers. Hundreds of them packed into makeshift cells, some still chained, some clutching makeshift weapons, skeletons wrapped in faded jumpsuits, bones scorched by plasma fire. They hadn't died in combat, they died waiting. Elra knelt by one of the remains and brushed a hand across a child's name tag, barely visible through the dust. The letters spelled out Mina. She didn't cry. She didn't speak. She just stood up, turned to the squad leader beside her and said, "There's no trial, no arrests, no mercy." The core still present on Astron 5 were found in the administrative dome, living in luxury. They hadn't even considered evacuation. To them, this place was too small, too insignificant, too far from the front. That was their mistake. The human soldiers didn't storm the dome. They locked it down, flooded it with a nerve mist, and waited. 3 minutes later, they walked in without a single shot fired and dragged the survivors outside. Execution was fast, quiet, one bullet for each. No speeches, no hesitation. But vengeance wasn't the only thing happening. Project Earthshatter had another purpose, to unite. Elra's face was now broadcast across human colonies. People recognized her not as a soldier, not as a commander, but as someone like them, someone who had suffered and survived. Her presence inspired survivors to rise up, to send coordinates of hidden camps, weapon caches, resistance cells, and when people heard about Astron 5, something inside them broke. Even colonies that had declared neutrality began volunteering ships, supplies, fighters. Some civilians turned their mining vessels into makeshift warships. Some turned water freighters into mobile refugee arcs. Every fleet Kale sent returned with more humans than they left with. Lost sons and daughters of Earth who had lived in darkness for decades. The galaxy started to whisper, humanity has returned, not the diplomats, not the scientists, the monsters. Because that's what the core began calling them now in panic transmissions. Monsters in black armor, monsters who feel no fear, monsters who take no prisoners. And behind those monsters always stood one name, Elra. One day, after a brutal liberation mission on the frozen planet of Deltas, Kale stood on a snow-covered ridge beside her. "They've started calling you the Fire of Earth," he said. Elra didn't answer. She stared into the distance where the last of the core strongholds was burning, black smoke curling into the twilight sky. Kale studied her carefully. "Do you want this war to end?" She nodded slowly. "Yes," but she looked at him now, eyes hard. "Not before they feel what we felt, not before every scream is answered." Kale put a hand on her shoulder. "Then let's make the stars scream." They didn't just strike planets anymore, they struck systems. Project Earthshatter escalated and the war changed shape, no longer a battle of colonies or borders. It became a purge, a cleansing of the rot that had fed on humanity's absence. The core, once confident in their dominance, now panicked in every corner of the spiral arm. Their fortified sectors crumbled. Their allies went silent. Their trade lines snapped like frayed wires because humanity had become something the galaxy hadn't expected. Unforgiving, unrelenting, unchained. Admiral Kale approved strike after strike with brutal efficiency. The Terran Armada split into flotillas, small but lethal, each one led by Ghost Corps veterans and armored with tech once forbidden under peace accords. The humans were no longer bound by old rules. They had bled too much for those treaties. Now they rewrote the terms in fire. Elra led one of the flotillas. Not as a military commander, she still lacked rank, but as something more powerful, a living symbol. Every world they liberated broadcast her face, her words. People saw her stepping off landing crafts, walking through ash-covered cities, standing in the wreckage of core command towers like a flame that refused to die. Her latest mission brought her to Myros Theta, a planet once used as a transit station for human slaves. Now it was an armed core garrison, their last hub in the Cordaxis belt. The operation was code-named Ashwalk. The plan wasn't just to win, it was to erase. Fleet bombardments began at dawn. Precision strikes decimated shield generators, artillery nests, and core transmission centers. Then came the drop troops. Wave after wave of black armored Terran units, their insignia glowing red under the clouds of war. Elra landed with the second wave. As soon as her boots hit the scorched concrete, she felt the electricity in the air like the planet itself knew it was about to bleed. Gunfire erupted in the distance. Human squads moved with brutal coordination, cornering and flushing out the enemy. Drones swarmed over rooftops, striking like metal hornets. She passed a burning skiff and stepped over the charred remains of a core officer still clutching a plasma blade. It wasn't war. It was a message. Inside the core command citadel, they found something unexpected. A vault. When they breached it, they uncovered dozens of cryo capsules. Inside them, human children, some no older than 3, others infants, all in stasis, all alive. They were being bred, grown, stocked. For what? No one answered. But the message was clear. This wasn't just about conquest or labor. The core had planned something darker, something deeper. That discovery shook the human fleets harder than any core weapon. On the flagship Iron Resolve, Elra stood before a conference of Terran leaders. Some called for restraint, wanting to investigate further. Others screamed for escalation, total extermination. Elra, quiet at first, finally stepped forward. "No more diplomacy," she said, her voice cold. "No more questions. They took our children, they fed on our silence. Let's make sure our silence ends them." Vote passed unanimous. That night, across dozens of worlds, core facilities were purged. Human AI systems initiated penance protocols, coordinated strikes that used the gravity wells of local stars to collapse their orbital platforms. Kale sent a single message to the remaining core strongholds. "You called us vermin, you called us fragile, you called us weak. Now listen carefully, because this is the last thing you'll ever hear from Earth. We were gone. Now we are returned, and we are angry." The core high command responded with panic. Their leaders began to flee. Their planets fell into chaos. Systems turned on each other, paranoia consumed them, and in every whispered broadcast one name echoed like a ghost: Elra. She had become more than human. To the core she was fear itself. To humanity she was vengeance made flesh. But inside her the weight of it all was growing. Every child they failed to save. Every scream she arrived too late to silence. Every face buried under rubble. She stared out at the stars one night, alone on a cliff above the ruins of Myros Theta, and whispered to herself, "Will it ever be enough?" Behind her, the war engines hummed, and far across the galaxy, new enemies began to notice the rise of the Terran Armada. They would come, they always did. But this time, humanity wouldn't wait for them to strike first. The Terran Armada no longer flew under banners, they flew under shadows. Across the core dominion, human fleets swept through star systems like storms with no name. Colonies liberated, outposts reduced to cinders, cryo camps broken open, and the stolen dragged into the light. But now it wasn't just the core who were afraid. The Galactic Accord, a coalition of alien species who had once watched Earth burn without lifting a finger, was watching the new humanity with increasing unease. They had always seen humans as emotional, fragmented, short-lived, curious, but ultimately containable. Not anymore. Now the Accord watched the core be dismantled world by world, and they wondered how long before Earth turned its gaze elsewhere. They weren't wrong to be afraid. Elra stood aboard the bridge of the Harbinger, the newest warship in the fleet. Built in orbit over Mars, it was longer than any pre-war ship. Black hull, silent engines, entirely run by AI when needed. She didn't speak much these days, not unless she had to. Each world she stepped on carried the weight of her legend. Children reached for her hand. Soldiers saluted with tears in their eyes. Survivors whispered prayers in her name. But inside, Elra was rotting. Too many names, too many faces, too many times she'd seen hope die before it could bloom. Kale saw it, Vera saw it, but no one dared speak of it. And now a new crisis was growing. In the Serapis expanse, where the edge of known space frayed into darkness, a signal had been intercepted. Not core, not human, something else. Kale ordered reconnaissance. A small probe was dispatched. It returned static, then silence. The last image it captured showed a planet completely wrapped in metal and black storms. And above it, a ship the size of a small moon, dead and drifting, but pulsing faintly with unknown energy. The AI called it the Shrine. Kale wanted to avoid it, focus on finishing off the last of the core, but Elra said no. They waited while the core harvested us. They watched. Kale frowned. "You think they're part of this?" "I think they were hoping we'd die, and now they want to see what comes next." So they went. The Harbinger, escorted by the Iron Resolve and 3 support destroyers, entered the Serapis expanse under full comms blackout. What they found wasn't a planet. It was a graveyard, ships, thousands of them, not just core. Alien vessels of a dozen kinds, shattered, floating, some still glowing, others ancient, and in the center, the shrine. Elra stood at the observation deck as the ship approached it. The surface of the structure shifted like it was breathing. Lights blinked in patterns no one could decode, and then without warning it spoke. Not in sound, in memory. Every crew member on the Harbinger experienced something different. Some saw old lovers, some relived childhood moments, some saw horrors they'd buried years ago. Elra saw her brother. He was 12, laughing, holding her hand. Then the fire, the screaming, the core ripping through the shelter. She dropped to her knees, breath frozen. The shrine whispered into her bones, "We remember, we preserve, you were supposed to vanish. Why have you come back screaming?" Elra looked up at the cold void outside the viewport and answered, teeth clenched, "Because you watched, and you did nothing." The lights inside the shrine flared, and for a moment the stars flickered. Back on Earth, deep space telescopes recorded a brief drop in universal radiation, a cold spot, a fracture. Kale ordered the fleet to retreat. Elra disagreed. "This is why the core were never stopped," she said, "because something let them." "You don't know that," Kale replied, fists clenched behind his back. "I know they're not afraid of us yet," she whispered, "but they will be." She authorized a strike. 4 torpedoes launched. They struck the shrine's surface and detonated. Nothing, no explosion, no fire, just a deep hum that shook every ship for miles. Then the shrine opened, its outer layer unfurling like a black flower. Inside were thousands of orbs, each glowing faintly, each holding something. Kale stared at the scans. Their memory cores, species, entire civilizations stored like books. They're collectors, said Vera, voice hollow. They don't interfere, they harvest what's left after we kill each other. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Elra whispered, more to herself than anyone else, "What happens when they come for us too?" Kale looked her in the eyes. "Then we do what humans do best." She turned to him, slow and steady, "Make them regret it." The shrine didn't attack. It simply folded itself back in and drifted away, vanishing into a rip in space that closed like an eyelid. Gone. But the message was clear: humanity was being watched, and next time they would not be underestimated. They called it the Reckoning, but not in the way the Core had imagined. In just under 3 Earth years, humanity had done what no species in the known galaxy had managed before. It had brought the Core Dominion to its knees. Not through diplomacy, not through slow attrition, but through ruthless, precise, and emotionally fueled warfare. Entire star clusters fell without resistance. The Core's once mighty home world was now a drifting cinder, broken by the fury of a race they had once deemed obsolete. But Elra felt no triumph, not when she stood among the ruins. The fires of vengeance had burned so hot she had forgotten what peace was supposed to feel like. After the encounter with the shrine, every human ship had returned to known space with one thought echoing through its command deck: what else is out there watching? Earth became something different, not just a home world, a fortress. Orbitals multiplied like spiderwebs, fleets patrolled the edge of mapped systems. Science labs studied every trace of the shrine's energy signature. Blacklight AIs ran predictive models day and night, anticipating the next move from the collectors, but no second encounter came. Instead, the galaxy reacted. One by one, smaller species who had once ignored humanity now came forward, not to challenge but to submit. Some offered alliances. Others offered information. A few simply sent apologies. Humanity listened but never forgot. Admiral Kale was now the head of the United Terran Order, a militarized council representing all surviving human colonies. Earth, Mars, Europa, even the outer rings of Alpha Centauri, unified now by war and trauma. He pushed for expansion, not conquest but preparation. Because if the shrine had truly stored dying civilizations like books, then someone had written the ending. And Kale refused to let humanity be just another page in someone else's archive. Elra, however, refused command. She vanished from public view after the final campaign on the core capital world. The media speculated. Statues were built, songs were written, but she was done with speeches, with war rooms, with the ever-tightening noose of expectations. She had become a symbol, but symbols didn't sleep. Symbols didn't grieve, and she needed to do both. For a time, she lived among the survivors on Luna Station, working anonymously in the medical relief ships. She held the hands of orphans, helped rebuild broken irrigation systems on decimated colonies, taught kids how to read. But even in silence, her legend grew. People whispered when she passed. Some cried, some saluted, and eventually the galaxy stopped fearing her and started believing in her. That's when the second message came, not from the shrine, from a distant star, one long dead. A transmission carried on quantum dust, repeating endlessly. Elra was summoned back to the Harbinger, now upgraded, rearmed, and even larger. Kale met her in the war chamber, older now, tired but alive. When she walked in, he smiled faintly. "You always come back." "I never really left," she replied. He pointed to the screen. The signal pulsed softly like a heartbeat. Translated by AI, the message was brief. "They're coming, they don't want peace, they want the last spark. You are the last spark." It was signed with a name long thought lost. Juno, the first interstellar scout ship Earth had launched over a century ago. It had vanished into dark space, presumed destroyed. But now it was alive, or someone aboard it was. Elra stared at the message for a long time. Her hands didn't tremble, her voice didn't shake. "What's the protocol?" Kale gave her the answer she already knew: there is none. So for the second time, humanity prepared not for war but for something worse. Contact, not diplomatic, not hostile, something else, something they didn't understand. The Terran Armada began forming again, this time not to destroy but to seek, to learn, to protect. And at its center stood the Harbinger, reborn not as a warship but as a warning. Elra stepped aboard once more, this time not as a soldier, not as a commander, but as the bearer of the flame, the last spark. The ship launched from Earth's orbit in silence, passing beneath a line of banners showing every colony lost, every planet scarred, every world reclaimed. People watched from towers, from bunkers, from forests and ruins and orbital cities because they knew the war had ended. But the fight for existence had just begun. Elra stood at the front of the observation deck looking at the stars. Somewhere they were waiting. Whoever they were, whatever they wanted, she didn't care anymore. Let them come. Because this time humanity wasn't just ready, they were angry, they were united, and they had an answer for the darkness. We are not the forgotten, we are not the dust, we are the fire. And in the silence of space, the Harbinger roared toward the unknown, not with fear but with purpose.